Well, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our latest edition of CatalogIt Presents. We're delighted to have with us today Joy Tahan Ruddell. Joy is a longtime friend of CatalogIt. She's been a friend and advisor to us since really the start of our company. Joy has got, more than 30 years of experience in the museum world. She was the senior registrar at the Oakland Museum, where she worked for over 20 years. She's taught museum studies at the graduate level. She currently has her own business, JTR Collections Consulting, where she provides a whole variety of collections and registration services to a variety of museum and private collections and individual collectors. And with that, Joy, take it away.
Thank you, Dan. As we get started, Dan and I are going to turn off our cameras and we'll move right into the presentation.
Oh, one more thing I forgot to mention there, just to let everyone know, this session is being recorded. The recording will be made available to everyone. And there's also a little questions button you'll see on the GoToWebinar panel. Feel free to type in your questions there, and we'll get to them either in the course of at the end of the webinar, or we'll get to you via email afterwards. Thank you very much, and Joy will take it from here.
Thanks, Dan. So just to get started, I wanted to kind of introduce why I did this webinar in this particular manner. I work and consult with a lot of very small museums who rely on volunteers or rely on staff that is either not trained in collections or a staff member that wears all the hats in the museum and doesn't necessarily have the depth of collections experience. So I provide this webinar, a similar webinar to this, as a tool for museums to share with their volunteers, for volunteer trainings, for staff to kind of learn the A to Z of collections management, and also to share with their board. Often boards in very small museums and historic houses are very hands-on and participate in a lot of the day-to-day, but they don't necessarily understand the ins and outs of collections management. So this is something that I like to present and I like to move forward with. There are going to be a lot of slides, a lot of information on the slides, and as Dan said, there's no need to write everything down. The slides will be made available as well as this recorded presentation. So we'll get started. So I like to start with this quote by the American Alliance of Museums. Guided by its mission, the museum provides public access to collections while ensuring their preservation. This is a quote that I like to use as a guidepost for all of my projects and how I help all the small museums. I want everyone to understand that, yes, it's really important to care for our collections. It's really important to preserve them for the future, but at the same time, we want to make them accessible to the public and to our communities. So I wanted to start with quickly, what is collections management? So collections management really encompasses everything that surrounds collection care and logistics with objects. Registrars and collections managers ensure that collections are safely stored, that everything is documented, and that everything is presented in a collections management system or on exhibition or on the web properly, and everything is tracked logistically. Recognizing that a lot of museums have one staff person to do all the roles or rely on volunteers for the collections roles, I wanted to kind of go over what the different roles are and who actually cares for collections. You have your registrar and collections manager, who is responsible for the day-to-day, the handling, the legal paperwork, documentation. You have the curator, who manages the intellectual and creative aspects, so the interpretation for exhibits, presenting collections in context for exhibitions and for programs. You have the preparator, exhibit installer, and art handler. And those are the people that handle the collections, whether it's to pack them, whether it's to put them into storage, whether it's crating or moving from one room to another, or getting things ready to travel on exhibition. And last, but certainly not the only other person, is the education and interpretive staff. So this is the staff that implements programs. They work with diverse audiences. They often work with school groups. And these are the people that ensure that the museum's mission and education goals are aligned with whatever their programming is. These roles really work together to make sure that the collection is presented in a way that is accessible for the public and puts the present into context. And again, often many of you do all of these roles and don't necessarily have training in registration or curation or education, but you're tasked with doing all of those things or relying on volunteers to help you with them. So why have collections management? Why does this exist as a profession? The first and the most obvious part is to preserve collections for the future. This way we can make sure that that the museums tell the story about an object or an event or past and present, and to make sure that in the future these everyday objects are put into context, either cultural context or just in context of an event. And we also want to make sure that our collections are available. So the collections manager ensures that the collections are shared between staff at your museum, volunteers, your indigenous communities, the public, which could include teachers, school groups, your general public, your local neighbors, researchers, so this is often academic researchers or curators from other institutions, and your local community. There are really key documents that all museums should have in order to make sure that their collections are taken care of properly and safely. And one of those is the collections management policy. The collections management policy is really the document that describes how the scope of your collection and how that collection is cared for, how you will approve acquisitions, loans, the actual overall what your museum intends to do. This is a document that is not really changing very often. It's one that you want to adopt and have buy-in from your staff and your board, but the policy is one that should live for probably about 5 years or so, and then revisited to change the policy. You do not want to just up and change your policy for convenience. You want to really think through what your policy is. Does it still align with your mission, and is it something that you want to edit or change? The next document is your collecting plan. So the collecting plan is an internal document, and what this does is create a document which lists either specific objects that you would like to collect in a certain period of time. So perhaps a 5-year plan that you want X, Y, and Z objects to complete a whole in your collection. It's objects that you collect in order that you collect in order to meet your mission and vision, and things that your goals for the next few years in terms of collection strategy and funding. It also helps you with things that you don't want to take in. If you collect opportunistically, you'll have oftentimes unsolicited gifts of things that you don't really want or you don't really need, and falling back on your collecting plan and saying, oh, I'm sorry, this doesn't fall into our collecting plan. We're not collecting those kinds of things right now. We're not collecting grand pianos, but maybe there's another institution who'll take them. It also allows you to make exceptions. So this also can be a place where you say that if some outstanding object that falls without your collecting plan is offered to the museum and it's something that you can't pass up, it explains how you make those decisions and how you can decide to take something in outside of your plan. And last are the collections management procedures. So these procedures are a detailed guide on how you implement your collections policy. So while your policy is the what is it we're going to do, the procedures are how we're going to do it. And the collections management procedures are changing documents so that if you find out that there's some systems that you're using that don't work, you can edit that. Or if you change your mission or change your staffing model or have more volunteers, you can alter your procedures to work with the staff and funding that you have at that time. There are a lot of different collections management processes. This list represents some of them, not all, but most of them. It includes acquisitions, accessions, and deaccessions, and we're going to go in a little bit deeper in the next slide on acquisitions, accessions, and deaccessions. Collections documentation, which includes imaging your collections, entering everything into your database, all of the legal paperwork, whether it's a gift agreement or loan forms or any of the other documents, appraisals, other information that belongs with the collection is all part of collections management. Loans in and out, you'll track, a lot of museums track loans. They offer loans to other institutions, other museums, and they also take loans in for display or for research or for exhibitions. Insurance and risk management is also key. This is a great way to make sure, one, that you're adequately insured and that you're protecting your collections from all the risks that are out there. There are also legal and ethical requirements that are included in collections management processes. One example is NAGPRA, and that is something that all museums must be able to deal with and implement and understand. And it's a big part of collections management, especially today. Permits and contracts. So the permitting process with some collections, for example, natural sciences collections, you have to have a permit to collect that eagle feather in your collection, or that walrus tusk, or those migratory birds. Any of those things in your collection, you need to make sure you have the appropriate permits to actually have them, to possess them, and to collect them. And you also need to make sure whoever you're getting them from, that the gift that you are receiving of a taxidermied something, that that person legally had the right to collect it and to donate it to you. And contracts, again, are the loan forms or courier contracts, things like that. Collections, research, and access. So this includes both research from your staff, people on your staff or your board that want to come in and research your collections, or a curator that wants to look through everything in order to discover a certain part of your collection for exhibition. And access for your local community, for researchers, both locally and nationally. You could do that research virtually through online exhibitions, through online information, or also just providing them PDFs of information in your collection. Storage, so maintaining a good storage facility, having a good plan for where you store things, how you store things, that they're protected in storage, and how your storage is set up appropriately for the collection. Preventive conservation and preservation. So this is the one, it's tied into risk management. So it's making sure that you're handling your collections and housing them in a way that will preserve them for the future. And then also, if things get damaged or objects degrade, then you have a conservator, or you have a plan for how you're going to repair those and conserve them. Crating and shipping, which also ties in with exhibitions. So anytime you want to pack or crate or ship an object, there's so many steps that you need to think about in terms of safe handling, in terms of is it going via truck? Is it being hand carried on a plane? Is it flying cargo? How is it going, and how do you make sure that you're packing it in the safe way? And how do you make sure that your customs documents are in order and everything that you're doing is correct? That's all part of what your collections manager or registrar does. And then exhibitions, planning an exhibition, researching collections, borrowing objects from other institutions, working on your facilities report, all of those things are important as well. So I like this slide because it kind of shows how an object comes into your collection, but it doesn't just appear and you put it away or you use it. There are lots of things that can happen. And this is a good slide to share with volunteers so they understand just what it takes to get through everything. So you have a vase or another object that enters your museum. It may enter as a loan, and it may enter as an acquisition. If it's a loan, it could be there for exhibition or research. You have to make sure that you have all the paperwork related to that object and to that loan. You still document it and catalog all the aspects of the loan, including condition reports, display, research. And then at the end of that, you work on all the paperwork in reverse to return it to the lender. With acquisition, so an object may come in to your collection as an accession, or you may acquire something for your education collection or as a prop. And we'll talk about that a little bit in the next slide. So we'll talk about the difference between acquisition and accession. Oftentimes, objects that you accession, you also send out on loan to other institutions in the future, or you put in traveling exhibitions or storage. And then there's always the process of deaccessioning. If you don't need the object anymore, if it falls under the criteria for deaccessioning, you may deaccession it and then determine how you're going to dispose of it later. So the first part of what I talked about on that slide was acquisition, accession, and deaccession. So an acquisition is made when a museum acquires an object. So the title of that object is transferred from the owner to the museum. Not all acquisitions are accessioned. So it's important to note that just because you take an object in, it may not be accessioned. Your gift paperwork should be clear that something is coming in as an unrestricted gift, and that it should also clarify that if you're not going to accession it, you should clarify that. Oftentimes we take objects into our museums that are very similar to objects in our collection. We may bring in a clock or a Gold Rush era shovel or a gold pan, and those are things that you might want to use as props and education tools. So they're handled, you bring them out for school kids to look at, you might take them to schools for different programs. Exhibition props and these kinds of education collections, if they were to be accessioned, you would not be able to do the same things with them. You wouldn't be able to have them handled by school children. You wouldn't be able to get rid of one and replace it later because it is accessioned. So in this way, you own it, you can do whatever you want with it, and there's no legal or ethical considerations that are the same with accessioning. So accessioning is the next step. So when an acquisition comes in, you can decide if you want to accession it. So it's a two-part process of first acquiring the object and then documenting it as an object into your permanent collection. So you physically create, and your collections policy should outline at what point you decide and how you decide and when is this object accessioned. Is it when your committee accepts it, or is it when you catalog it into your collection? So these objects that you accession come into your collection from various sources. They may be gifts, they may be bequests, they may be transferred from another museum, or they may be field collected or purchased. So deaccessioning is the last one, and a lot of people kind of stray away from wanting to talk about deaccessioning, or they think that deaccessioning is a great way to fundraise for your museum. And what I want to talk about is that, so deaccessioning is, at the root of it, the process of permanently removing an object from a museum's collection. And it's also really an important tool to maintain the sustainability of your collections and the relevance of your collection. If you had a mission 40, 50 years ago that is not the same mission that you have today, you'll likely have many objects in your collection that have nothing to do with what you're doing now. And though that is one of the main criteria for deaccessioning. So it's good to cull the certain objects that you're not using so that you can, one, optimize your collections management. By doing this, by removing these objects from your collection, you have more room to store and more time and funds to put towards things in your collection that you actually do want to collect. Resource allocation is similar. It allows the museum to responsibly use their resources towards collections that are important to them and meet their mission. You're not paying for storage for a a train car that you're never going to use, but you're paying a ton of money to insure and store, you're able to deaccession that possibly to another institution who can use it, and that relieves you of that burden and allows you then to store other things. Professional collections care. So you don't want to keep an object in your collection that you can't care for, and you don't want to spend the funds on caring for objects that do not align with your mission, or that don't work with your cultural and educational programs. Another reason, repatriation and restitution. So this is where, for example, NAGPRA objects, the NAGPRA allows you to deaccession and return the objects to the native communities in which they belong to. There's also museums that collect artwork that may be illegally collected, for example, Nazi era artworks, or artwork collected from other indigenous communities around the world that should really not be in their possession. And this is a great way for you to meet your ethical and financial responsibilities by returning these objects. So again, so you must have specific, the object you're deaccessioning must fall in within certain criteria. The first one is the relevance to your mission. If this object no longer aligns with your mission, then you can put it up as a recommendation for deaccession. Or condition and preservation. If the object is in such bad condition, if it's damaged beyond being repairable, or it's not feasible because of expense, or if repairing the object really essentially means replacing pieces that are broken with new pieces that makes the object essentially a facsimile rather than your object, that's a reason for deaccessioning. Duplication, if you have 27 thimbles in your collection and you really only need one or two, you can go through and select the ones that are most appropriate to your institution, and then deaccession the others and possibly transferring them to another institution that collects sewing equipment and would be thrilled to have these 27 additional thimbles. Provenance and legality, anything that's come in to your collection and it might have been collected and acquired illegally. Perhaps the donor collected it illegally and gave it to you, or the museum had paperwork that was forged, or some information that just wasn't correct. This way you can remedy all of those issues by returning the object. And we already talked about financial resource considerations and compliance with NAGPRA, but all of these are criteria for deaccessioning, and it's important to note that when you deaccession something, the funds from that deaccession, they're not meant to pay your light bills, they're not meant to pay your lease, they're not meant to pay for your electrical, for anything like that. It's actually meant to go directly back into collections care. So either deaccession funds go back into your purchase additional objects that do meet your mission and scope, or that funding is allocated towards direct collections care. So it could be to conserve another object or something of that nature. So how do we ensure the longevity of our collections? Well, there are many different things we can do. One of them is through comprehensive collection stewardship. So that's making sure that all of the processes, that we follow all of the professional processes related to collections management, that we have a good collection plan, that we have up-to-date collections policies and procedures, and that our staff and volunteers know what those policies are. Clear job descriptions and an adequate staffing structure. This is one that's often overlooked. If you don't have the appropriate staff to take care of your collection, it's irresponsible to continue collecting things that your staff cannot deal with. Or if you have one staff person that has 20 different roles, perhaps they do rights and reproductions, and they do exhibitions, and they do loans, and they take care of programs, that one person can't do all of those things well. So being able to have a clear job description of what that person does, and making sure that you have enough people to do those things, and then making the decision to not do certain things. Know what you can say no to, because you can't do it all. thorough documentation practices. That's through your collections management system, tracking locations, tracking all of that. Proactive risk management. So that is all of the things that we do. We'll talk about in a future slide to take care of our collections in terms of light and humidity and emergency planning. Strategic planning and funding. It's important when you're applying for grants that you have a plan for what you want to do, or if you're going for funding, don't just go for funding just for funding. Make sure you have a plan laid out so that you know what you're funding. You have a clear outline of what this project is going to do. And that's actually a better way to go to a grant, a person that's granting you money, or to a donor. And then stakeholder support. You want to make sure that you have buy-in from your board, your administrative staff, and your community for all of the things that you're doing in your collection. If you create your collections policy in a vacuum and your board doesn't understand it or buy into it, then they're not going to be a good supporter of how you work and of your collection. So your collections management system is a really important tool. In the olden days, when I first started with registration many years ago, we used card catalogs, we used analog systems and filing systems to track everything. And it was really easy to put a slip of paper into the wrong file or the wrong folder. Today's collections management systems are really designed to track all the information related to your collection. You have an image, you have all of the data, you can upload the copies of the gift agreement, condition reports, you can track locations. Its whole history is right there. And if it works on mobile, it's basically in your hand. Wherever you are, you have all of this information. And modern collections management systems include things like digital asset management. A lot of them are intuitive. They have really great interfaces that allow images so that you can quickly spot what you're looking for. You can use it as a project management tool, and you can also, I mean, it helps you streamline your tasks. It helps you assign projects to people and to have all your data in one place. Documentation. So you can see on this slide shows a screen. This is actually from CatalogIt, a screen of a folder of parts of your collection. So this is the Inyo National Forest photography collection. You can document certain parts of your collection and put them in folders together. You'll see they're accessioned. And you also want to make sure you have all the documentation related to it. For example, this is a copy of a deed of gift, but you also would have purchase agreements, invoices, wills, and trusts. All of those are really important to maintain. And if you have an oral history related to the object, it's important to keep that as well. These are just other examples of documentation. So one, you want to make sure that you image your collections. It's nice if you can have your own little setup. It could be something as simple as a table with backdrop, and you can use your iPhone even if you don't have any fancy equipment. Just having an image of it is something that's really important. You can see that this is an old catalog card. This is from the Smithsonian, and this is how in the 30s they used to document their collections. They didn't do photographs, they did lovely little drawings, and all the information, the dimensions, the location, they were all on this initial intake card. And also having clear accession numbers. So you'll see in the corner that there's an accession number that's highlighted. You want to make sure that your collections, that you have good numbering systems so that you can find them. The numbering system is basically the address of your object. You can type that in and find the object in your collection. Without being numbered, without numbers, you essentially have a group of objects that you really can't find very well, or if you have 10 of the same thing that are exactly the same, the number is what helps you distinguish between them. This is my example of why precise documentation is so important. This is a real life example of a jade pagoda. It's 1,300 pieces. It was actually installed and deinstalled 4 times in a 2-year period. And the first time it was deinstalled, it had not been taken down in probably 20 years. So documenting exactly how each part fit into each other, what part went where, what number each of the parts were. So you can see on the one side, all of the pieces are numbered and they also have trays with their numbers on them. It was photo documented so that you can see exactly what piece goes where and how it clips in. Imagine not having the documentation for this and trying to figure out how to put it back together again. It would be virtually impossible. So this is really key. Inventory. So conducting an inventory is really important, and it's a great way to assess the overall condition of your collection and to make sure everything is where it is. You have different kinds of inventories. One is a comprehensive inventory where you plan in advance. You usually need to hire volunteers or hire staff or have a lot of volunteers on hand to do room by room storage, including storage, and if you have sculpture on your grounds and things on display, it's pretty much you're putting your hands on everything in the collection, comparing lists to the things that you should have on a shelf to make sure that they're actually there, and locating things that maybe have been misplaced on a different shelf. So the comprehensive inventory is really important, just to make sure you know where everything is and it's ethically the right thing to do. This is something that you would do maybe once every 5 or 10 years. It's a huge undertaking. The other thing that you can do are spot inventories. Spot inventories are actually a lot easier. You can plan these, maybe do 1 or 2 spot inventories every 6 months, in which you select one room and you inventory that entire room. So that way, over time, you will have done every single room. And when you're doing that, you'll see, are things where they're supposed to be? Does anything need to be rehoused? Do I need to take pictures of anything? Does anything need conservation? Are there moths? Is there mold? So all of those things are things you can note while you're doing the spot inventory or the comprehensive inventory. And they help you create projects for the future. Prioritize, like if it has mold or moths, that's something you want to take care of right away. But if it just needs a different kind of mount or something else, then you can probably wait on some of those things. So risk management. So this is everything that you do to protect your collections from whatever hazard may occur. And this slide I like because it shows like every single weirdo thing that could happen in your museum. And while you might think that some of these are unrealistic, I could probably tell you that I've experienced almost all of them. A kid writing on a painting, or another person bumping into a sculpture that's on a stand and knocking it over, or walking around not really paying attention with your headphones on and knocking into something, or having food. All of these things are issues. Food attracting pests, too much light, causing light damage, moisture causing mold. All of those things are things we need to think about. Preventive conservation, I spoke about a little bit earlier, but preventive conservation focuses on the proactive measures to safeguard your collection. So these are the things that you do to make sure that they do not get damaged. You go through and make sure, for example, that all the paintings that are in bins are in there correctly. They're all back to back, face to face with acid-free cardboard. If they're not, you can change them, or you can, some things that should really be laying flat, you can do that. But this is a good way to do all the projects. The slide on the bottom, you'll see is an object. It's an artwork by the artist Bruce Connor, and it's essentially an assemblage, and one of the main components is an ice skate, a very heavy ice skate that is being suspended to the object. This is usually upright by pantyhose. And pantyhose, if those of you who don't remember, they degrade over time, and the weight of the skate is degrading the pantyhose and then pulling, and eventually that will, it's called inherent vice, and that will will damage the piece. So in order to allow this object to last longer, you really kind of have to sit and think through, okay, it's in storage, I'm going to store it on its back. How am I going to support the skate so that the object doesn't put pressure on the pantyhose? What do I do to help make this object last longer? And that's pretty much preventive conservation in a nutshell. So the processes by which you use to make sure that your collections are cared for are are pretty specific. So you're going to want to have some good hygrothermographs or ways to measure the humidity and temperature in your galleries or in your storage areas to make sure that they're appropriate for what's being stored in there. You want a light meter to make sure that there's not too much light. You want to make sure that your HVAC systems are up and running and at appropriate temperatures. And using mounts. Mount making is really a great tool, whether it's with monofilament and specialized mounts that attach to the wall, or anchors or vitrines, anything that you can do to make sure that this object is safe, and that in the event that someone bumps into it or there's an earthquake, that it's not going to fall over and break, or a wire's not going to come off the wall and you're not going to lose your painting, or that no one can come in and steal it. I wanted to talk a bit about light damage, because this is something that is really really important in terms of protecting collections, and it's something that a lot of really small museums and historic houses don't really always want to do all the things or can afford to do all the things to protect them. A big thing is that to understand is that light damage is accumulative, and when you have a museum that leaves objects on permanent display for years and years and years, that prolonged exposure to light is going to degrade the object, whether the material gets brittle or the colors fade. Those are things that are not correctable, and things that you can actually destroy the object, so it's not usable anymore. And light damage could also trigger chemical reactions. Certain dyes or pigments or certain things could happen and deteriorate the object. And it's irreversible, so you cannot repair. Some kinds of damage you can repair, but light damage is something that's it's there. And that's why it's really important to put things back in storage periodically and change up your exhibitions. So different ways to mitigate light damage, again, is to have a gallery rotation schedule. Make sure that things that you have in your collection that are really susceptible to light, for example, leather or paper or photographs, those things, they're not on display for a really long time. That you have a plan to replace them or rotate them so that you're not leaving one object out for years and that one object becomes so damaged that you can't use it again. Use appropriate lighting. So you can set light levels based on the sensitivity of the material. So some objects will require lower light levels than others. UV filters, there's lots of UV filters, coatings you can put on windows and display cases. There's also UV filtered light fixtures that also help you avoid damage. And lighting controls, so you can have timed lighting if no one's in the, or motion sensitive, if no one's in the gallery, the light goes off. If no one's in storage, the lights are off. And then display cases. Display cases, you could use UV filtered glass, and really having lights inside your display cases is not a great option, because that light also could cause too much heat in your case, and you don't want to damage your object that way. So I'm not going to talk too much about how to get rid of pests, but I'm going to touch on it. So integrated pest management is really important. And like mice, for example, are attracted to food. You have insects that are attracted to the different materials in your collection, moths, for example, to textiles, silverfish to paper. So the important thing is to figure out ways and to have plans on preventing those pests from even getting into your collection, to whether it be an exhibition space or storage. Preventing food, making sure that there's no food, cleaning, putting things in boxes, things like that, so that you can protect them from the pests. And last, in terms of risk management, so everyone should have a disaster and emergency plan. You can see in the upper corner, that is a copy of what's called a pocket plan. This is something that you fold up, it fits in your wallet, it has all the information that you need. If you're home and there's an emergency, it has a checklist of who you need to call, who's responsible, what are the different resources that can come and help me, where are the emergency services. And so these are all things that you implement after first responders. So if you have a fire, obviously your first responders are going to enter, do what they need to do for the fire, and then when it's safe, go in. People safety is always first, but when it is safe for you, or if you can talk to that the fire person and show them the floor plan on your pocket plan and say, can you please bring out the objects that's in this room and this thing here? That's also really key. And a lot of them you can have, they're no longer just paper copies. You can have all that information as a PDF on your phone, or so that you can check it from wherever you are. And this is just a sample of different things, how water damage can affect your photographs, and fire and smoke damage. What's important is that you have a plan and that you have the supplies on hand. You can see the cabinet on the bottom has all of the emergency supplies and things that you should have on hand, so you're prepared in the event of an emergency. Do not touch. So this is key in protecting your collections. And why do we not touch? Well, as you can see the pennies up in the image, and I for programs, I try to use real pennies to show, here's shiny new pennies that haven't been handled. Here are pennies that have been exposed to the environment, have been held by people. The oils on your hands, and acidic oils, they degrade the object. And you can see from the non-handled and handled, the huge difference. And sometimes it doesn't even take very long. Some of the pennies will tarnish in just a matter of days from being handled. The important thing is that your hands are clean, you're wearing clean gloves, and that you change your gloves frequently. I can't say this enough. I've seen so many people say, but I'm wearing gloves, but they've worn them all day long, the same pair, and they're just filthy. So cotton gloves, change them regularly. You can wash them. Disposable gloves, the same, change them regularly. If you're going to touch hazardous objects with your gloves, don't touch your face and don't touch another object, change the gloves. You want to make sure that you're safe and the object is safe. So proper collection handling. There are a lot of different procedures, and I like to kind of go through this one little checklist. Preventive conservation does start with careful handling. So the goal is really that you handle an object as little as you need to handle it. If you don't need to pick it up, if you can look at an image, and that's really what's great about having images of your collection, you may not need to go get it. You might be able to just look in your database. Before you pick something up, think about what you're doing. Take your time. If you're picking up a teapot, for example, don't pick it up from its handle. Pick it up with two hands from the base. Always use two hands. Don't assume that handles are secure. Don't hold frames from the top. They might be loose. Support the object. Plan a route and a clear passage. So make sure that you know where you're going. Have a landing spot on the other end. Use a cart as much as possible so you're not hand carrying walking around. If you do hand carry from one space to another, just make sure that it's in the appropriate box, that your route is clear, and that someone's with you to make sure there's no one running around in the middle. Again, use both hands. Make sure your hands are clean. And one other thing is, don't use pens or sharp objects around your collections. We often say to use pencils, and yes, pencil can get on an object, but it's much easier to remove pencil than it is pen from something. So use pencil for taking notes. And if you're cutting paper or trying to cut a box, make sure the object is nowhere near what you are cutting and nowhere near the work that you're doing. I have actually seen someone cut an envelope down to fit an object and accidentally cut through the photograph. And there's nothing more heartbreaking than something like that. So just be careful and go slow. And always remove your jewelry. If you're wearing a badge with a lanyard, take your lanyard off. Roll up your sleeves, pull your hair back. Anything that dangles that could catch on the object, make sure you have it tied behind you or not on at all. Okay, we're going to move on to storage. So as I mentioned before, storage is a really important part of your facility. And part of that is because on average, only 2% of your museum's collection is on display. The rest is going to be in storage. So there are different kinds of storage, and I'm going to go through a few examples. So this is an example of visible storage. So in this way, the photo with the ceramics, they are actually cabinet doors that close, but when you open the cabinet, you can see all of the objects. They all have numbers that are clearly visible, so you don't have to handle the object. The key with visible storage is allowing you to find an object without having to necessarily handle it. So I can see these are the objects, I can inventory them without moving them because they're all exposed, they're all securely nestled in drawers or with foam. When the doors close, they're earthquake safe, but I don't have to handle them to find them. You have drawers with glass fronts, you have casework with glass fronts, and cabinets with doors. Compact storage. So this is for storage that are on carriages. They have hand cranked and they have ones that are powered. I always recommend the hand cranked for the simple reason that the powered ones, something is always going to go wrong and you're going to have to spend a ton of money to repair your electric space saver. So I'm a fan of the manual, and this allows you to condense your space. You can have there is a quotient. I think it's like twice as many shelves in one space as you do if you have freestanding spaces. And everything is secured in your space savers. Because the objects are moving, you want to make sure that they all have their mounts. And again, and this is a good example of having numbers on the outside. This one uses barcodes, but everything is nestled in a specialized mount so that the movement is okay. If you live in an earthquake zone, having earthquake strapping is a really important thing. And the other thing to note is that there's always one shelf that's open because you need to have one opening. At the end of the day, make sure that you select one carriage that is always open and make sure that the things that are in there are the least susceptible to damage in terms of an earthquake, or if there's any other issue. Those things are things that are securely on the shelf. You want to make sure that the one that is open is as secure as possible. Hanging screens. So hanging screens are a great alternative for paintings, for framed works, signs, if you have a collection of signs. In this way, again, they're visible. You can pull the screen out and visually see everything. You don't have to pull everything off storage. The nice thing about these is they have grates, so you can oftentimes see the accession number on behind it, but it's also good to have the accession number on a tag that's with the piece, so you can see its accession number, but you can also find the piece easily. And then we always have oversized objects, things that we don't really have a good shelf for, and that's where pallet racks and pallets come in handy. You want to have everything secured safely. I'm from California, so I always think about earthquake and making sure that everything is strapped in a way that it is padded so it doesn't add any abrasion to the object. You'll also notice that the things on the floor are on pallets. You always want to have things raised up off the floor whenever possible. I know with vehicles, sometimes it's difficult, but any objects, boxes, pallets, or collections on the floor, you never know if there's going to be a flood, and a flood might not be caused by nature. It might be a pipe bursting or sewage backup, and the last thing you want is for your collections to be on the floor in a box that's going to be wicking up all the water. You want to have things raised up as high as possible so that you're minimizing the risk of water damage. So I like to end my presentation talking a little bit about community access, research, and collaboration. Many years ago, I mean, registrars and collections managers were really known for being the people that said no. They wanted to keep the collection safe at all costs. They wanted to keep things in storage, and the field has changed. And we're now at a point where you can't just protect all your objects in storage. You need to be able to share them with your community, and having programs, having ways to bring your community in to see collections for research access. Perhaps you have your indigenous communities for like NAGPRA purposes. You want to bring your community in to review all the artifacts. You want to have a school group come in and learn about objects. There's something that you learn about objects when you see them in an intimate setting like this, then you don't learn by seeing something in a case. And having these opportunities for your public is key. And the nice thing is that not only does your community learn more about the object, you have the opportunity to learn more too. Their observations or their knowledge, their cultural knowledge or historical knowledge is also something that you can record, and you can bring all of that information back into your collection. Someone might know what this basket was used for, and you might not have, so you can record that information. This is an example of a project of community collaboration and a collections project. So I did a project with an organization who is not a collecting organization. They're volunteer based, and they moved into a building, and the city found in that building about 20 trunks that belonged to the Filipino migrant workers in the 40s. And unlike other migrant groups, when they were brought in, the Filipino groups were brought in as bachelors. They did not come with their families. So if they passed away or something happened to them, they didn't have family there to collect their things. So essentially this trunk is everything that that one individual owned, stored into this trunk that was kind of wasting away in this basement. This organization took the project on to unearth them, to open them, catalog them, photograph the contents. And because these were all volunteers, they did not know how to do all of these things. So working with the community to teach them just fundamental imaging, handling, how to catalog, what's important to capture. All that information was really important, and there were letters in these, and so the community was often able to translate these letters and figure out who they belonged to. And a lot of them, the family was contacted, and they were able to return some of these objects to their families, and the ones that weren't are now there's a record of them. And the goal at the time was to be able to donate them to the proper institution. And at the time, the Smithsonian was in contact with them to acquire all of these. And part of why they wanted them was basically because the community had done all the cataloging and all the documentation was there. So I again can't stress enough how you're collaborating with your community is a really important part of collections care and preserving collections for the future. So now is the end of my part of the presentation. Dan is going to come back on. I'm going to turn my camera on. I want to thank everyone for attending today, and I know that all of you have a lot on your plate working in museums, and I really appreciate if you have any questions at all. Please feel free to email CatalogIt at support@catalogit.com, or my email address, which is on the screen. We'll also try to get to all of the questions that you submitted in the webinar. Dan?
All right. Well, once again, Joy, thank you very much. We sure appreciate it. It was just a great presentation. I love the examples that you provided there. Really thought-provoking. And again, any questions, support@catalogit.app. Feel free to send them. If we didn't get to your question today, we'll get to it via email. And again, this presentation is being recorded. The recording will be available. Just reach out to us, or you'll find it on our website. Thanks, everyone, and please stay tuned for the next our next episode of CatalogIt Presents. Thank you very much.
Thank you.